guys, so welcome back. Now that I got the surfboard hot coated, the leash plug and the vent plug installed, which if you haven't checked out my previous videos, go check those out now if you haven't seen them. So now it's time to sand the surfboard. Now at this stage, the surfboard could totally be surfed since the board is watertight. But to get a truly professional looking surfboard, I gotta sand a surfboard to flatten out any brush strokes, bumps, or anything like that in the hot coat. So the equipment that is required is, well, a sander. And I'm going to show you a few different types that I have that can be used, starting with this guy here. This is the quarter sheet palm sander. Very low cost, and it will totally get the job done. But it's going to take a lot more elbow grease, a lot more time. Next up, we got my personal favorite, a random orbital sander that's more expensive than a palm sander, but will get the job done a lot quicker. And if you plan on building a lot of surfboards, I recommend you get one of these guys right here. This is a variable speed automotive polisher, or at least that's what they're usually used for. This thing is a beast of a sander. The way one of these polishers or sanders work is you need special pads for sanding, and the pads come in a few different sizes and firmness. So the pads have a 5/8 threaded hole that will screw onto the sander, and this is this spindle here, or I think it's spine or spindle. Anyways, regardless, it's a 5/8 threaded rod that these screw onto. For the sanding pads, I'd recommend getting one of each. So you got this one here, which is a hard. Hard levels out the fin boxes, and the medium, which I have right here, the medium and the hard pad flattens out surfaces on the surfboard, the main parts of the surfboard. And this guy here, which is the soft in yellow, you can use to sand the rounded, softer contours of the surfboard. Now these are a specialty item, so I had to buy them from a surf supply, and I bought mine from Green Light Surf Supply, where, like I mentioned in my other videos, which is where I get all of my surf supplies. So check them out. I have an affiliate link in the description as well. For the sandpaper, you just cut out regular sheets of sandpaper like this and attach the paper to the pad using spray glue, like this stuff here, Super 77. Okay, a few other things about this sander. This sander will destroy your hard work in a hurry, so I'd recommend playing around with it a bit on a test surface first, and then sand your surfboard with it. Also, this sander will throw up a ton of dust, so it's just something to be aware of. It's going to make this whole place super dusty. And an important tip when using this sander is you've got to keep the sander moving all over the surfboard so you don't burn through the hot coat. The pros can sand a board in a couple of minutes with one of these guys. And I mostly use this to flatten out the surfboard and remove any brush marks and uneven spots all over the surfboard. Then I switch over to my random orbital palm sander because it's easier to use. The vacuum attachment on it works really well too, so I can collect a lot of the dust. I will mention one thing though. You might be tempted to buy a cheap polisher that looks like this, but trust me, it's garbage. It's terrible. They won't have enough torque to spin the pad properly once it touches the surfboard. And what ends up happening is it bogs down and it causes uneven sanding. And ultimately, it will just frustrate you. So don't get the cheap ones, guys. I do not recommend them. You can pick them up for like 40 or 50 bucks. Avoid. So personally, if you're just making a few boards, I just get a good quality random orbital sander, like this guy here. It doesn't have to be the most expensive one, but even the cheapest one will do the job. It just probably won't last as long. And I'll have links in the description below to all of these sanders and, you know, stuff I'm using. Lastly, if it's your first board, I wouldn't sand the rails of the surfboard with any of these power sanders. I would just tackle it with a sanding block, a soft sponge that will contour around it, and just use some elbow grease, because it's really easy to burn through at the rails into, you know, you can sand into the fiberglass very quickly. Enough with talking about these sanders and all this other stuff. Let's grab a respirator, which I should mention, you probably want a good quality respirator or dust mask, and let's get dusty. Time to put on my garbage bag. Also, I used to use a Tyvek suit when I did all my sanding. I generally can't be bothered to do that anymore. This keeps most of the dust off me, and I can just throw these out when I'm done. Like, I don't know, garbage bag works just as well. Stylish too. So I'm going to start off using my polisher or my sander, this guy here, just to flatten everything out, and then I'm going to switch over to the random orbital sander. I'm going to start with 120 grit sandpaper. If you know your finish isn't too rough, if your finish is rougher, you might want to do like 100, but 120, 150 probably is a safe place to start. If it doesn't seem to be removing enough material, you can always go back to coarser grit. Cheap dollar store scissors. These are strictly used for cutting sandpaper. Also, make sure you do not use cheap sandpaper. Use good quality sandpaper, or else it'll just tear up on you and it won't last. Also, I'm going to cut up a bath mat, and I'm going to use it as a pad between the board and the stand, so that way it makes a nice anti-slip pad. What I like about this polisher sander is that it's variable speed, so I can have lots of torque all the way through. But you see what I mean? This thing will throw around so much dust, it's incredible. I'm just gonna run it at like, I don't know, maybe 2 for now. Try to keep the dust down a little bit. So for sanding the contours, a little bit around here, the nose especially, because there's this concave here, I'm switching over to the yellow pad, which is the soft pad, which is a little bit more flexible than the medium, and that'll come up. And once I'm done that, I might switch over to maybe 180 grit, work my way up to 220, and then assess. But I probably won't show too much of that because it's pretty boring, but you get the idea of how to sand. Might switch to the random orbital when I start getting up into the higher grits as well. But yeah, that's all that there is to it. Alright, back here, I've switched over to the palm sander, 120 grit, and I'm going to just finish up this edge, clean this up a little bit, make this nice and sharp. I'm going to sand part of the rail with this, maybe switch over to hand sanding. These fin boxes are almost sanded open. I'm going to leave those alone for now. And yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. I only have one spot where I sand it through into the fiberglass, which is on the other side back here, but the rest of the board's looking awesome. This is where I'm going to sand a nice hard edge back here. Alright, my least favorite part of building a surfboard is done. At least sanding stage 1 is done anyway. So that was a very, very dusty endeavor. I got the shop cleaned back up. So now the board is sanded nice and flat. The surfaces are level, smooth. There's no ripples in it or anything like that. But I did sand through into the weave of the fiberglass just a little bit in a few little spots. Now what I could do is I could just fix up those spots and then blend them, feather them back in with the rest of the hot coat. But I'm just going to do a whole other coat just so it's nice and even. So I get a nice thick gloss coat. Technically it's another hot coat. They call it a gloss coat because that's leftover terminology from using polyester resins. You can look that up if you're interested. But anyways, all it is I'm going to do now is put another hot coat onto the top and the bottom of the surfboard and do the same thing, and then I'm going to sand it again. Just that way, now it's super smooth. This next coat won't take much epoxy and it should go on fairly level. So I vacuumed off the board. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe it down with some acetone, denatured alcohol, methyl hydrate, anything like that, and to remove any waxes or oils that might have gotten on it if I contaminate it with my hand. And then I'll do another hot coat. But I'm not going to really bother to film any of that. If you're interested, or I'm not going to bother to actually go through it in depth. I will film some of it. Go out and check out some of my previous videos for this build and where I did the hot coat for this board, because it's exactly the same. But so far, it's looking awesome. I'm like very, very, very happy with how well this board is coming out. For my first wooden surfboard, yeah, I'm super stoked to get this done and get it in the water.